Thank you. And now let me introduce you Scott Novich. He's co-founder and chief revenue officer at Neosensory. We will talk about Neosensory Buzz, a journey in designing effective sensory augmentation system.
Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Novich, the co-founder and chief technology officer at Neosensory. And I'm excited to be speaking with you all today about sensory augmentation using our company's product Buzz as a driving example. So a quick bit of background, if you haven't heard of Neosensory, we develop wearable platforms for giving people new senses. A good example of that is our first product, which came out last year in February, called Buzz. Buzz is a sensory augmentation wristband that out of the box maps sound to touch. So it takes in sound from the environment in real time through its onboard microphone and provides you with a real-time low latency representation of that sound using vibration around your wrist on 4 vibrational actuators. So for example, if there's an ambulance going by with a siren, you'll kind of feel the frequency sweep of vibration around your wrist. Likewise, if someone were to knock on your door, you'd feel that kind of knock, knock, knock pattern on your wrist as well. But this is a platform, even though it runs this algorithm out of the box, we have an open API and open source SDKs that enable developers to plug in whatever information streams they want into this band. So a little bit of history. This project started out as my PhD work with my former PhD advisor, now co-founder, Dr. David Eagleman. We originally developed this as a vest that had 32 vibrational actuators all over it. And the goal was to provide enough information of sound from the environment such that someone who is completely deaf could come to understand speech. So we created that and we got great preliminary data. David gave a talk at TED. That's a QR code to his TED talk about this. And then we launched Neosensory, and after a number of years and a number of iterations and user research, we ended up with a wristband. So I'll explain a little bit how we got to that in a bit. But before that, I want to explain what sensory augmentation is. So sensory augmentation is the idea that there's some information out there, whether it's sound, stock market data, weather data, sensor data from drones. And the idea is we want to train up a new sense of that. We want to perceive that information kind of natively in the way we think of sound, vision, or touch. And we can do this non-invasively by encoding this information to some target set of sensory receptors on our body, as long as we do it in a smart enough way such that we try and guarantee that as much of the information that we care about makes it to the brain. So it's the job of the sensory augmentation device to bridge that gap. So this device needs to take information from the environment and find an appropriate mathematical representation of that and an appropriate encoding for our set of target sensory receptors on our body that tries to guarantee that as much of this information makes it to the brain as possible. So unfortunately, I don't have enough time to get into this in any amount of detail in this talk, but here's a link to my PhD thesis, which goes into this in a fair amount of detail and provides kind of like some great underlying examples of the math involved and how you think about creating these algorithms. But we can go a little bit deeper in detail first. So taking Buzz as an example, Buzz has 4 what are called linear resonant actuators. So these are little vibrational units. And they are specifically designed to target a type of receptor, sensory receptor in our body called our Pacinian corpuscle. So these are mechano or touch receptors underneath our skin. And here's a great, this QR code links to a great talk about how those work. And so our Pacinians, they fire action potentials to the brain in proportion to the vibration amplitude being applied to that receptor. In this case, they pick up on vibrations between 50 to 300 hertz and amplitudes on the order of 0 and 0.1 centimeters, and they can detect changes in vibration on the order of like 5 to 10 milliseconds. And this is the sweet spot for what LRAs and a lot of other off-the-shelf consumer haptic vibration technology targets. So the LRAs that we use in Buzz, they vibrate at a fixed frequency of 175 hertz but we encode our information using vibrational amplitude over 256 discrete or 8 bits of levels around the same amplitude range, and the LRAs can change intensity at approximately 16 milliseconds or so. So it's really the case that the buzz is, the hardware in the buzz is kind of more the bottleneck than the receptors are themselves in this case. So given that, because buzz has 4 vibrational actuators and we understand how many different levels of amplitude we can encode and speed at the rate at which we can encode that information. From a digital signal processing perspective, we could say buzz encodes an 8-bit quantized 4-dimensional signal with a 62.5 sample rate. If that sounds like a bunch of junk that I just spat out to you, no worries. Again, oh, here's a QR code to one of my former thesis members' books on digital signal processing. And also, again, check out the thesis. But this basically gives us a really powerful framework, a mathematical framework for how we can think about, given some input signal, which we've mathematically modeled, it tells us how we need to shape the signal to fit this kind of output constraint to get this information to our brain. And the assumption is that if we're encoding this information within the constraints of our receptors in our body, that should be enough for the brain to train up on that information, so long as we're not throwing too much of it away when we compress it. So with that being said, that's a quick tour de force of sensory augmentation. I just wanted to go over some quick learnings that came to me thinking about how we got from our vest to this wristband where we are today. So the first lesson, and this doesn't apply to just sensory augmentation, and it's probably pretty common sense to all of you, but it's the importance of doing user research. So when we started Neosensory, we were a bunch of academics, and we were really focused on running scientific studies. So we put a lot of time and effort into developing our vest prototypes. And to be fair, we're still working on our vests, but at first we didn't do much user research. And we went out the door with these beautiful, awesome vests and ran these scientific studies, got some good data back, but then we also started getting feedback from these users who are deaf that they actually didn't really care about learning speech, but they did mention that they were enjoying the experience of getting all sorts of other useful environmental information happening around them, whether it was stuff that was more emotional, like being able to feel the sound of their children laughing, or more useful, like knowing that the water is still running off their sink. And because of that, that told us, okay, if people don't care about speech, we don't need 32 vibrational actuators on the body. We can get away with a lot less, something like 4. So that really drove home to us. And that was a great lesson on the importance of doing user research early on when developing a new product. The second lesson, and this is more sensory augmentation specific to a degree, is it's really important to design for compliance, or getting users to wear these devices kind of all day, every day, from when they wake up to when they go to sleep, even maybe when they're asleep, because when you strap these devices on, there may be information that is immediately obvious and useful that you're getting, but your brain really does need to train up to understand this information in a more perceptual sense, or to a higher degree. So here's a quick shot of some results from a recent paper from our scientist, Mike Parada. Also, that's a QR code link to that, but this just shows how people perform at identifying different sounds through the buzz who are deaf over the course of several weeks. And as you can see, it takes weeks and actually months for the brain to rewire itself to a large degree to train up on this information. And so because of that, when designing these devices, it's really important that they're designed in a way that people are willing to wear them pretty much all the time. And so in that case, that strongly guided us towards a more kind of user-friendly form factor that people were comfortable with, like a wristband rather than like a giant kind of clunky, bulky vest. At least for the use case of people wanting to just train up on a general sense of environmental sounds happening around them. And so those are the two big major sensory augmentation learnings that we had in our product design and development. But just to close this out, beyond that, I just want to reiterate again that Buzz and the technology we develop is meant to be a platform at the end of the day for people to build all sorts of cool sensory expanding applications on top of. So we have a burgeoning developer community. This is just a small sample of what's going on, but people have been creating all sorts of really cool applications, like providing sensory feedback for those with prosthetics, more out there ideas like sensing electromagnetic fields or performing echolocation so you can navigate without vision. One of my favorite recent projects that I've seen out of our community, and they're actually spinning this off into a startup, is called Valence, and they're running a sentiment analysis on speech audio to act as kind of an emotion or social aid for people who are neurodiverse. But the sky's really the limit. And so for those of you out there who are just learning about sensory augmentation for the first time through this talk, totally encourage you to check out our developer site, neosensory.com/developers. Would love to see you playing around with our tech, and we have a Slack channel. We have a Slack workspace you can also join. So, and that's about it. So it was great speaking with you all today, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thanks again.
Thank you, Scott. And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Excited to be here at 6 in the morning. No, it's awesome. Really, really, really cool. Love seeing all the other talks that have been on here.
Thank you also for the early leave. So
yeah, no, not a problem.
And it's really interesting to see the design transition you actually did from a full-size vest to a wristband, which actually led to a more immersive and a more also effective way for users to feel this the augmentation of the senses. And to this regard, and also to the community of contribution about this project, sensory augmentation seems to have all the potential to find application also in field such as immersive experiences and exhibition, but also working environments. And what's your view on this topic, on these possible applications?
Yeah, that's actually one of the big things that we're really excited to be exploring and see other people also exploring. And that's what makes this technology so challenging, because there's so many things you can do with this simple device. But yeah, in terms of so like one of the big things, and this isn't immediately obvious to people because of the out of the box we're running kind of the sound to touch sensory substitution, which is kind of, it's already sort of like a native sense that we're used to. We're already used to sound. But one of the big enabling things for this technology is providing information streams to users that aren't already kind of pre-existing senses that we're used to. And that's something I'm really excited to see a lot more applications for. So being able to feel the state like if you think of just any arbitrary information stream like that's coming off of sensors from a factory or a quadcopter or something like that, you can jack that data into the body and feel what it's like to be a factory or feel what it's like to be a drone, and hopefully develop kind of useful perceptions around that. And that's something that I'm really looking forward to see more of with our technology, or with sensory augmentation in general.
Thank you, Scott. Maybe we have some question from our public.
Yeah, got a question coming from our research unit. Thank you again, Scott, for being here with us. In order to further specialize the quality of the communication to the end user, what do you think are the most promising technologies to use in combination with tactile simulations?
Oh, in combination with tactile stimulation. That's a really interesting one. Because I mean, I guess it's definitely, our senses definitely fuse information, like, so our senses definitely fuse information cross modality. I actually hadn't given much thought to providing kind of a fused augmentation. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, the idea is, in addition to tactile stimulation, what can be achieved by, say, using another modality such as sound, for example. That's a really cool concept. Honestly, I hadn't thought of that within kind of the operating framework for what we're currently doing, but you could definitely, I mean, it's certainly a possibility. Sorry for such a generic answer, but does that
conversation about that. I just bought a domain,
Sure.
complementary technologies to use with Scott Novich tech stack. Let's talk about it. Thank you again.